and welcome back to another episode of Year-Round Halloween. I am here with the English teacher at Chesapeake High School, who's Ms.K. Ms.K, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Ms.K. Everyone knows me as Ms.K, much easier. I teach English 9 and 12, and I also teach Avid 12.
So what got you into reading?
My parents were avid readers, grew up with libraries and libraries filled with books, and I always enjoyed reading from a young age, and that's how I escaped. My mom introduced me to big books when I was about 8 or 9. I used to dig through her shelf and get curious about certain things, and I like creepy things to read. So that's what got me into it. And I was the only child, so there was only me and my books.
Is that like a common theme across the readers? Because like for me, I got into reading because both of my parents did like to read like yours. They didn't have libraries just because like that wasn't really like a thing. Like my mom wasn't like, oh, I want a library. She was just like, oh, I want this book. I'll get this book. Mm-hmm. But she had read through the entire Harry Potter series. My dad was really into Stephen King, so he had like Billy Blockade, It, Carrie. It was just very closely connected. And like you said, reading was a way for me to escape when I was younger because I'm the oldest of all my siblings, but for a while it was just me. So it was like, okay, I want to jump into this fantasy where I'm running through different books. Is that a common theme across readers, is just escaping?
Yeah, books are a way to escape and see another different life that isn't your own. That reminds me, you make me think of my son because he's the oldest, but he's the oldest by his first sister didn't come until he was like 8. And he did nothing but read books. He would read book after book and just pick them up and just would read anything he could get his hands on. And I think it was the same thing. It was like a way to escape and, you know, get away from it all.
To jump to the topic of this podcast, a very dark...
He's dark.
He's dark.
Really dark. He's not as dark as he used to.
So we are going to jump to the infamous and most horrifying reader, so I have heard, Stephen King. So Stephen King has put out many books, many horror books. His most famous, I think, and probably most recently put out movie would be It, both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Now, I read, in my entire lifetime of 17 years, I have only read 2 Stephen King books, sadly. I read Carrie. I read Billy Blockade cover to cover. I was proud of that. That book I actually liked a lot because it tied to baseball, and I was a softball player. So I was like, okay, I like baseball. I was like, let me read it. And I didn't pick up at the time that Stephen King was this horror author, so I was like, it's just going to be about baseball. And I read it, and spoiler alert, I ended up actually figuring out at the end that the catcher for the team in Billy Blockade was actually shanking people before they hit the bag. And it was this horrifying, like at the time I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was like, how did he do this? Like, how do you get through baseball doing this and nobody pick it up? How do you write about this? Because I was like, I don't know if Stephen King played baseball. If he did, great for him. It's a great sport. But like, you have to know the ins and outs and have to actually do your research to understand how these things work. And I feel like that's probably a reason he's so horrifying, is because he can put in your head, this will happen. And like he writes it with such imagery and such like distinct word choice that it makes it to where you can't unsee it, even though you've never seen it. I want to ask you, you've read more than I have. And so I want to ask you, like, have you seen that in any other authors, like that level of just detail and imagery?
I guess I'm going to be biased and say heck no, but no, it is. And I like how you said unsee, because a lot of times when I'm reading and I get so deep into his detail, and as he's like slowly building up, and then all of a sudden he just like shows you or exposes you to something that you weren't ready for. And then I'm like, whoa, I can't even like not get that out of my head now, because he just took me there. And it's just out of nowhere a lot of times, and you have like that moment. And no, I'm going to be biased. I think that Stephen King is definitely the best when it comes to detail, because people always say, well, his books are so long. How can you read a book that's so many pages? But because he's such a great writer, and because you really just see everything that he writes, you just see the words and it becomes a picture to you. It almost becomes a film that you don't even notice that you've read 200 pages in like the last 2 hours. It's just like you're just in that moment with him.
You're immersed in like this universe that's ink and paper.
Yeah.
Have you read Carrie?
I remember parts of it. Yes, you're like bringing up like so when I was your age, I read it. I read Carrie. I read The Shining. I read Dolores Claiborne, probably around like between the ages of like 13 and like 18. I'm showing my age here.
Fine.
That was about 25 years ago.
I think that's an accomplishment. Props to you for reading that many books.
Oh.
I can't. It took me 3 years to finish Carrie. My mom considered that like a starter because that was a small book. It got me thinking like, how does this man put out so many horrifying books and people still go back to that fear? And I like that you said that it brings in like when you're reading his books, he uses so much detail and imagery and such like description that you don't realize you're reading. And I feel like that's what a lot of people don't understand with reading is like, oh, you just read to read. Like, no, I read because I end up entering this different universe. Mm-hmm. You mentioned The Shining. I've only seen The Shining movie, the Jack Nicholson, like the actual movie, the older one. I've seen that one.
So The Shining kept me up for again, escapism. I would stay up at night because I was so sad and I missed my friends, and I would read The Shining every night. But then I couldn't go to sleep because it is one of the scariest ghost stories ever. Like, each ghost has their own story, and this boy is going and kind of reliving their story. So if you watch the movie, it's not really about the father. You have to watch the miniseries because, you know, Stephen King's books are so long. You can't do it in 2 hours. Like, if you want to know the detail, if you want to know the background and what actually is happening, you have to actually like watch a miniseries, or they have to split it up into 2 separate movies like they did with it this time, which was a good idea. Yeah. They failed the first time they did it movie. The new It, I like it, but they did a miniseries, and like, again, showing my age, in the 80s.
I think I know what you're talking about.
That they actually did, which broke up the book into like little parts, so that you actually got to see like a whole 6 hours of the book, film. And it actually gave you a little bit more detail. And I like how they did this one too. But yeah, The Shining, I don't know if you noticed, but you've only read like 2. A lot of his stories kind of are about the children. They're not really about the adults.
Yeah, from what I remember from Carrie, that one was very focused on Carrie and the bullying. And I remember from Carrie, she was this girl raised in a very strict Christian household, very religious. Her mother was very, I don't want to say crazy, because everyone is entitled to their belief, but I feel like Stephen King took that and made it crazy. There was a scene that I remember, and Carrie had gotten her period for the first time, and that's why people messed with her. They were like, oh, you're not even a woman, you haven't gotten your period, you're halfway through high school, you haven't even done this. Like, they always messed with her for that, and when she didn't know how to deal with it, they laughed at her more. And I remember feeling so sad for her because I had watched the movie and read the book. So I made sure I knew what this girl was going through. And I felt so sad when she went home and went to her mom for comfort and was like, help me, I don't know what to do. And her mom forced her to pray to the God to help her so that way she didn't become pretty much like a whore, because that's how her mom looked at her. That is horrifying. Like, that I think actually made me upset. And I was like, I don't know why I'm upset. I was like, my mom didn't do this. My mom wouldn't do this. But I was like, for whatever reason, I feel like this poor girl just going through all this like stuff. And like, I was bullied when I was a kid, but it wasn't to the degree that Carrie had to deal with. So then I felt like my situation was just almost amped up by a good like 100, which was terrifying because this guy that probably never met any of the people that's read his books, maybe a small percentage of the many, can get into the minds of people that have read his books and cause emotions like that, which is horrifying. I've only seen that in not even Edgar Allan Poe. You had referenced, like, you have to have these mini-series and these many, like, little, short, like, quick, maybe, like, an hour-long episode to get in even into close to any detail for these stories. So there's a few things I remember from the movie, and I'm going to try and go in chronological order of the movies. I haven't watched the first one in a little bit.
Okay.
So I actually want to talk about the part where you see Bev, and she goes home. She's slut-shamed throughout the movie for something that I'm assuming isn't true. I can't remember if it was true or not. And girls at school don't like her, the guys at the time don't like her, and she goes home and you see that her father's pretty much a drunk, and she goes into the bathroom with tampons and pads, and she takes them to the bathroom, but she tries to hide them from her dad. And I haven't read the book. I don't know if this happened in the book or if this was like their way of kind of foreshadowing like something in the book or like implying without doing.
It is in the book. It is a type of foreshadowing. There's a lot more showing of her relationship with her dad and the way he treats her and what he does to her in the book. Because obviously he's more at liberty to kind of show those things that you really probably can't put on the screen if you want to sell it to more people.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more of a background. That's only a touch of it. But you're making a connection, though, because you see how, like, Stephen King's kind of presenting that idea of once a woman is a woman, what that shows, like, as this idea of automatically you're, like, less than, or you're a Jezebel, or the way society sees young women once they hit that stage. It's like, well, then you're able to have sex now and you're able to get pregnant. So
now you're worth something.
Yeah. And then it's the way that, because he very much can look at women's issues and, kind of support them in a way that, a lot of writers aren't going to go into. How many men like really want to talk about women having their periods and bleeding and their first experience with that? And he kind of puts that like, hey, no, this happens to young girls and this is the experience that they have to go through. And sometimes they have parents that aren't going to be there when they need them through those moments. And he deals a lot with abused children. So in it, all of those children have experienced some form of abuse in a different way, whether that be physical, mental, sexual. It's all because they've been abused, and then in turn, they're all outcasts because of it. So in the book, it goes a lot deeper into each of their stories. That's why it's so huge, of course, because you actually break down each of those children's stories and all of the skeletons that come out because of their parents and what their parents did and what their parents experienced and what the town hid. And all these little secrets come out, and it shows what really happens, just like you said, behind closed doors. The things we don't know that happen to particularly young people in our society that we kind of hide, that we lock away, that we show or pretend don't happen or don't matter because we're not there. We don't know, right? So then these in turn are usually the children that are bullied, that are picked on, that are considered weird, and they're dealing with so much. So like in it, that's really what he's trying to show us. Like we lock away the things that we don't want to see or that we don't want to deal with in our society. And these are the people who are suffering the most, these young children. But they're usually also the strongest. So I think that's also the connection you made to Carrie. Like, you have young teenage girls in our school that have these same experiences that we don't know about either. Like, young girls that are abused by their parents, young girls that probably have never been talked to about sex or told, like, what you do when you have a period or what you do when this happens. And then they get themselves in situations and they don't know who they are. They don't know what their body means. They don't know anything. So I think, like, the great thing about him is he shows the human experience. And that's why we can connect to these characters, because we've all had a little tiny bit of that experience. Like, have we been all sexually abused? No. But can we talk about an experience that might have happened that made us feel uncomfortable, or when we did have our first time, or when we did, trip and fall and everybody laugh at us in the locker room or whatever. So that's what the great thing about it is, that I wish everybody did read the book, because once you read the book, you're like, oh crap, they sold us short on the movie.
I also wanted to ask about trying to like go through the movie in my head because, like I said, I haven't watched the first one. I remember the second one because that one truly petrified me.
The second one scared you?
Yes. Like, I wasn't scared of the first one. The first one was like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, it's a clown. And like right then and there, I was like, if I watch it, I was like, I won't be scared of killer clowns. The first chapter of it ends with it being like kind of basically shrunken I almost took that as like an ego type way, like his ego of being this big, bad, scary, out of this world thing is now shrunken to this quivering, stuttering thing in a gutter. Then they dropped the second one, and that was the one that petrified me deeply. In the very first scene of It 2, if y'all have not seen it, I will suggest go watch it. But it was very terrifying, almost on like an emotional and mental level, not like an, oh my God, like jump scare type thing. It was terrifying because the scene opens up with this gay couple at a carnival. And they start walking out and they're saying how they just like, oh, we leave Derry, all this will be left behind. But they don't exactly get the chance to leave Derry because the boyfriend that isn't just much of like a pushover, he's very like, oh, if you have a problem, say it to my face. Like, I'm not afraid. And for being confident and okay with his sexuality and all that, he ends up getting thrown off of a bridge into running water with a hat over his face in an attempt to suffocate him. I was like, that is petrifying, knowing that someone can think of that. So like, I was like, for somebody to put this on a screen, you had to have either known of an incident like this, heard of an incident like this, or witnessed an incident like this. So how I was saying, like, mentally and emotionally, Stephen King can get in your head. Did he do that in the book?
Of course. He's exposing all of the ugliness of humanity because people do stuff like this. How many hate crimes, how many times have you heard about somebody who's gay being dragged by a truck or, being beaten to barely breathing? Like, how can a human being do that to another human being? And the fact of the matter is, it's not even the clown that's scary. The fact is, the clown is all of the secrets and the evil in the town and all the bad things the town has done. That's what makes the clown strong. That's why at the end of the other one, it's like that quivering little stuttering thing because they took all of that away from it. And that's how it gets its strength. I get my strength through people's fears and through their hate. And why do we have hate? Because we fear things that we don't understand. And then in turn, we sometimes act in a violent way, and other times we can be positive. Civil. But yeah, like, he definitely will show us those things that we don't want to see for ourselves. I mean, but they're so real. People talk about how his writing changed a bit from his earlier days to after he had his accident, because he had a huge car accident.
I didn't even know that.
Okay, so Stephen King used to be an alcoholic and an addict, and he wrote some of his best work. He actually wrote a lot of the comics. You know, the Creep Show?
Yes.
With the thing that pops out of the coffin and go, ah! He used to write those comic books as well. So he used to just have this crazy, amazing imagination. And then he was hit. He was on a jog or something, and he was hit by a truck. And he was actually in a hospital for months. And then once he came out and he recovered, he sobered up. He's like, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm not going to do anything. And then everybody was like, well, his writing changed a little bit. It's not as dark as it used to be.
It was darker before?
Yes, it is pretty dark. I mean, when I read some of his newer stuff, I think it's still pretty dark. But there's I feel like a lot of his older books, yeah, they are a lot darker. And I feel like that also has to do with age. And as we grow and change and have our own. Oh, I could read all of that stuff. I could watch all that horrible stuff. But now that I have children, now that I'm older,
you don't want to think about it.
Right. Our perspective changes in the way that we think about things. He's still messed up in the head, but I feel like when he was younger, in a good way. You gotta be messed up. You gotta be messed up in the head,
in the head somehow, because he put out some amazing work, and he was also an alcoholic. He died drunk in a storm drain in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So it's also a theme I'm noticing is and that came up how he drank and he put out this dark, not as dark as Stephen King, obviously, because he didn't have all the errors of humanity.
So this is my favorite part of it. is when the little boy's arm gets ripped off. Like,
oh, like I remembered that scene, and I remember how Billy felt so bad because he had just let his brother get kidnapped. And I remember the unrelentless like search for his brother, even after he figured out like he's not coming back, just that aching to want to find him and say sorry and anything like that. There was this one kidnapping I remember watching something about, and someone asked the mother, they were like, "Are you still looking for your daughter?" And she was like, "I will look until my last breath on this earth."
but yeah, that's like a big fear too, right? Like, I can never imagine losing something, like even losing something, and you get so frustrated because you want to find it and you got to find it and you can't find it and you just are like, where could it be? And then you never find it. I couldn't imagine losing another human like that is that close to me, because yeah, I would forever want to search for them, which is the scariest thing too. And it's hard as a parent, because as a parent, if you have more than one child, once you lose one, a lot of times you're not as strong of a parent as you were for your other children, because it's like you're lost forever with that child that you lost, which is another one of his themes of, you know, lost
just
and
losing
and guilt, and how we have so much guilt by the mistakes that we make, even if we don't. Like, he made a mistake. He was a little brother. Go play by your freaking self. I'm doing this.
I'm the oldest of my siblings. So, like, for Billy, I can understand, like, you just lost your younger brother and your only sibling. So it's not even like you have, like, a do-over or, like, a restart in a way. I almost feel like Stephen King plays on, like, that older sibling type thing, too.
Well, you also just talked about community as well, because a lot of times the things where he puts the story is in good communities. So the brother, why would you think your brother is going to be hurt? You're in a great little sweet small town. Everybody's happy, because remember, it's the pretty much the frosting on the cake to cover up the mold. But everybody's happy. Everybody's innocent. Nothing bad ever happens in these communities. So a lot of times the Stephen King stories are always in good areas. They're not in like areas of, oh, we're down in the city where everything's supposed to happen. Yes, this can show up at your own back door too. So also like giving you that fear of, oh crap, this can happen to me. My children grew up in Hartford County and still do. So you can go outside, they play. Like, I let my children go run out and play in the woods and do all of it, right? My son, when he was young, he used to go with his friends and play for like hours and they'd just be gone. And I'd be like, okay, come back for lunch or whatever. But there were these times where I came to call my children in, and it would be like, wait, you're taking too long. Where are you? And then I'm pacing back and forth. And then I'm asking the neighbor, well, did Will come back? Oh, yeah, he came back like 15 minutes ago. Well, where's my child? And so that little fear of, well, my child could be missing right now. Somebody could snatch my child. Oh, my gosh. That has happened to me a few times.
I guess it's that fear of being a mother and knowing.
But you know, as the older sister, it's very stressful at times because you have all this responsibility and you are in charge of another human being in another life that is not yours.
So I guess this is probably the hardest question for a reader. Any authors you would recommend to any student looking to get into a book?
Let's see. Of course, I just said Octavia Butler. If you're a science fiction fan, she writes amazing science fiction. Stephen King, if you like horror. My young people, I like Angie Thomas. There is this book. I can never who's the writer that wrote A Blood? Gosh, I'm going to forget the name now, of course. It's Of Blood and Bone.
Of Blood and Ash?
That's the second one. I think there's a first one. Of Blood and Bone.
Well, like, the Blood and Ash series. I know what book you're talking about. It has like the red on the cover and it's black.
And it's about the girl from Africa, or is that a different one?
I haven't read it. I wanted to get it.
But yeah, like, of course I'm drawing a blank because you put me on the spot. You should have told me this question earlier. And then I would have had my list and I would have been like, yeah, you need to read this, girl. You need to read this. And now, of course, I suck because I'm like, can't remember anything.
Anyway, I wanted to thank you so much for being on my podcast. I know you claim you were a very shy person, but you did amazing on this episode.
I am so shy. I do this a lot in this. Don't you see me home? Like, you know. Bye, lovely guests. And if you need me, I'm in room 20. I know some of you are scared of me, but it's okay. I'm not scary.
She's not scary. I can vouch that.